This is a full story. Puppy wishes you all a happy and enjoyable story. My husband's first love turned out to be my best friend. When I discovered this, we had been married for 10 years. Flowers, wine, cake, balloons. Tony, holding my hand, tenderly spoke of the 10 years we've spent together. From the day we got married, I vowed to cherish Hailey for the rest of my life. Clap, clap, clap. The applause from family and friends was unending. Some sensitive souls even started secretly dabbing their tears with tissues. A handsome guy loving his ordinary wife for 10 years? Who wouldn't believe in love after seeing this? If I hadn't discovered Tony's secret today, I would have believed too. So enviable. Hailey is truly blessed. My best friend, wiping her eyes, looked at us with envy. You're quite blessed too. As soon as I said this, the entire room fell silent. The year before last, my best friend's husband went bankrupt and went alone to a fishing boat in Malaysia seeking opportunities. He searched for over 2 years and didn't even send a salted fish back to her. The house was repossessed by the bank and my best friend had to live with her parents. Saying she was blessed seemed like a mockery. For a moment, the atmosphere became awkward. My best friend's tears were hanging on her eyes, looking like a pitiful little cabbage. Hailey is drunk, it's all a misunderstanding. Tony tried to smooth things over, poking me with his hand. Right, I'm the one who's drunk. I thought it was a few years ago, should be punished. I laughed and pushed Tony away, raising my glass to my best friend. It seemed like an apology, but among the old-timers present, who couldn't hear the sarcasm in my words? After saying this, I pretended not to see the embarrassment on my best friend's face and turned to leave. If it had been more than 10 years ago, some of the men at the next table might have rushed over to rescue the damsel in distress. After all, some of them had even asked me to pass love letters to my best friend back in school. But unfortunately, there are no ifs. The boys who once sent love letters to the class flower are now mostly married with children, sitting beside their wives. Even if they sympathized, they wouldn't stand up for another woman publicly. This is common sense that even fools understand, but Tony doesn't. Like a dog, he circled around my best friend, afraid others wouldn't notice his little schemes. Tut-tut, the husband circles around another woman at the 10th anniversary banquet. So stimulating. Without looking back, I knew it was BAME. Such an annoying smarmy tone, even if turned to ashes, I wouldn't mistake it. Tut-tut, it's only a bit more stimulating than encountering a middle-aged greasy old bachelor. I turned around, my face already wearing a professional fake smile. Still so vicious. Likewise. I don't know why, but I seem to see a hint of nostalgia on BAME's annoying face. It must be an illusion. I forced a smile and clinked glasses with BAME, then moved to another table. Hailey, we need to talk. After the wine and feast and sending off the guests, Tony came over with my still crying best friend. I knew this pair of scoundrels would start trouble. Go ahead. I pulled out a chair and sat down. You must apologize to Serena. Tony took a righteous stance. And with the little white flower, who had cried throughout the banquet beside him. One might think I had committed a heinous crime. What if I don't apologize? I was almost laughing out of anger. I never realized Tony could be so brave. Tony probably didn't expect me, who had always been compliant, to argue back. So, are you going to divorce me? Should we go now? I cut to the chase, not willing to waste time with these scoundrels. Tony and Serena were stunned. Well, Hailey, don't get worked up. There must be some misunderstanding between you and Tony. You two should communicate well. I'll leave first. At this point, the little white flower's back didn't hurt anymore. Her legs weren't weak, and she didn't need support, grabbing her bag and leaving. Looking at her nimble figure, I guessed she could even participate in a race walk competition without issue. With Serena gone, I stared at Tony, who was left alone. Why don't you go see her off? Tony took a deep breath, regaining the familiar elegance I once knew. Hailey, Serena has been a good friend of ours for over 10 years. You shouldn't have treated her this way. It's really offensive. How much I used to like Tony's refined demeanor now matches how much I dislike it. I want to offend her. What can she do? Call her bankrupt husband from abroad to hit me? Hailey. As expected, mentioning Serena's husband made Tony lose his composure. What's wrong? Did I say something wrong? I stared at Tony until he started avoiding my gaze. Alright, I've always looked forward to our 10th anniversary celebration. Serena didn't handle her family's debt issues at home well, and came here to cause trouble. How could I not be angry? I shook Tony's hand. Tony's attitude visibly softened. She didn't say anything. Tony held my hand in return. It's not easy for her to raise her child alone. I shook Tony's hand off. Feeling sorry now? Why don't you go help her? No, that's not what I meant. Where did you get that idea? Tony awkwardly rubbed his hands. Although the guests had all left, there were still many service staff around. The earlier argument had drawn their attention. I didn't want to be the center of their gaze along with Tony. I left him to handle the payment and went home first. The first thing I did when I got home was to clean up the torn pieces of paper from the bed. I, Hailey, experienced such humiliation for the first time in over 30 years. My best friend, my beloved husband, had conspired to deceive me for 10 years. I gathered the torn pieces of paper from the bed, filled with Tony's love for Serena. Tony loved Serena for 17 years. 7 years longer than our marriage. From meeting to knowing each other, Tony's diary repeatedly reminisces about his love for Serena. Beautiful, melancholic, and wistful. In Tony's diary, Serena was the lilac-like girl. Unfortunately, the lilac was too beautiful, and Tony's clay pot couldn't sustain it. Despite the reluctance, the lilac was eventually transplanted into a fine porcelain pot. The clay pot was heartbroken and unwilling, so the kind lilac introduced her good friend, the dandelion, to the pot. The pot was moved and decided to marry the dandelion, burying its love for the lilac deep in its heart. Yes, I am that foolish dandelion. The first half of the diary ends on our wedding day. Tony's diary reads, I am no longer worthy of loving the lilac. Perhaps the dandelion is the flower meant for me. If the first half of the diary made me angry, the second half made me sick. Perhaps the daily grind of married life dulled Tony's artistic edge. For about 6 or 7 years, Tony didn't write in his diary. Until 3 years ago. Yes, Serena's husband went bankrupt. The fine porcelain pot broke, and the clay pot thought it was back in the game. After learning about Serena's husband's bankruptcy, Tony first felt sorrow for his first love's fate, and then he was overjoyed. Especially after Serena's husband went abroad, Tony was so thrilled he nearly set off firecrackers to celebrate. During that period, Tony often used overtime as an excuse, but in reality, he was visiting Serena with gifts. At that time, Serena was exhausted from debt collectors, so she was more than happy to have someone help. Every time a collector showed up, she would call Tony. Thus, the two of them maintained an ambiguous relationship in this unclear manner. If it were just this, although I would be angry, I wouldn't lose my composure. The real thing I couldn't tolerate happened on the 10th of last month. That day was my father's 60th birthday and also the happiest moment in Tony's diary. Tony naturally promised to attend, but on the day of the birthday party, Tony did not show up until the party ended. Even relatives from my hometown came by train, but the son-in-law was absent. You can imagine how angry my father was. I had to call Tony while making excuses for him. When I got home that night, I naturally had a big fight with Tony. I yelled at him fiercely, but Tony wasn't angry. He accepted the scolding with a dazed look. Later, I read Tony's diary and found out that I had arrived early to set up the birthday party. Tony did come, though slightly late, but when he reached the door, he got a call from Serena saying the debt collectors had come again. On one hand was my father's birthday party, and on the other hand was his first love's plea for help. Without thinking, Tony turned around and went to Serena's house. The debt collection agency had sent a new enforcer this time, perhaps because they were about to give up on getting the money. I never saw this enforcer, but from Tony's diary, I know he was a burly figure who supposedly inserted a knife into the table upon entering, scaring Serena's family quite a bit. With Tony's small frame, he naturally couldn't confront this strong man. But Tony didn't want to disappoint his first love, so in a moment of impulse, he agreed to help Serena pay the debt to send the enforcer away. The enforcer was ruthless, but not foolish. He wouldn't just take Tony's word for it. Before leaving, he searched Tony's cash and forced him to sign an agreement. Tony's help to Serena was clear to any adult, including Serena herself. To firmly bind Tony, she actively retained him. Then, everything that should and shouldn't have happened occurred. Tony wrote in his diary, "This is the happiest day of my life." Seeing this, I was so angry that my fists were clenched. Good job, Tony. The content I want to say would probably not pass the review. If you think that infidelity is Tony's bottom line, then you are mistaken. This pair of scoundrels' bottom line is far lower than you might imagine. I mentioned before that Tony agreed to help Serena pay the debt. But for Tony, who depends on his wife's family for the marital home, it was undoubtedly a huge amount. Although Tony has done fairly well over the years and saved a good amount of money, it is far from enough compared to this debt. Moreover, our savings used to be on one card, and if Tony withdrew a lot, I would definitely notice. Some might think, why not just get a divorce? Of course, it's not that simple. The house we live in now is my premarital property, and even if we divorce, Tony would not have a share. Moreover, an old house under my parents' name has been included in the Old Town renovation plan, and my parents plan to use the compensation to buy us a small villa. Tony had a good plan. Once the compensation arrived, he intended to sell our current house and buy a small villa. turning my premarital property into marital property. Tony shared this plan with Serena, who initially said it wasn't good but soon came up with a more malicious scheme. They planned to wait until the house was ready and then find a way to frame me for infidelity, which would not only get them more money but also make everyone think the fault in the divorce was mine. Serena is really a kind-hearted girl. I must protect her well, Tony wrote in his diary. Good grief. I directly said good grief. Is this called kindness? Tony must be blind. Since I already know the truth, I naturally can't stay with Tony any longer, but divorcing them now would be too easy. I must find a way to take revenge on this pair of scoundrels. However, the urgent task is to deal with the shredded diary. It's not yet time to confront Tony openly. After collecting the fragments, 2 hours had passed. At this point, my phone suddenly lit up. Ding dong. It was Tony's message. Hailey, the company has an urgent matter and needs me to work overtime. You don't have to wait for me. Go to bed early. Oh, I know without investigating that Tony must be with Serena now. Fine by me. I first hid the diary fragments, as they will be evidence when I take Tony to court. Next, I had the table where Tony used to hide his diary moved to my parents' house. This table is usually locked, locking away Tony's youth, and hasn't been opened for years. Recently, Tony and his first love have rekindled their romance, so he started writing diaries frequently. If he hadn't been secretly writing diaries in the study and locking them away to prevent me from reading, I wouldn't have been curious about what was in the drawer. If he hadn't frequently unlocked it, he wouldn't have forgotten to lock it that day, allowing me to open it. There are no coincidences. Everything was destined from the day he cheated. Finally, I ordered a luxurious office desk. Everything is ready, just waiting for Tony. The next day, when Tony came back, he looked exhausted, clearly drained by his indulgences. As he was about to go to his room to rest, I mysteriously approached him to give him a surprise. Before he could react, I opened the study door and showed him the new office desk from all angles. Happy? This is our 10th anniversary gift. I even got you a massage chair. It's so comfortable. I then, fearing I hadn't showcased it enough, turned on the massage chair's remote. Hailey, where's the old desk? Amid the hum of the massage chair, Tony's face quickly darkened. The old desk? I gave it to my dad. You know he's been into studying the characters in Hamlet lately, and needed a wooden desk, I said with a smile. Why did you get rid of it? Without a word. There are important documents in my desk. You need to get them back. Tony was so angry he could hardly speak, and standing next to him, I could clearly see him clenching his fists. Oh, he's angry. The so-called important documents are probably the diary and Serena's IOU. Isn't it said to be true love? How come there are IOUs? Not to mention, they even had fun with pink IOUs with lipstick marks. Why are you being so angry? Your desk was locked. Who could have stolen your documents? Or you can give me the key, and I'll help you get the documents back tomorrow. I chuckled inwardly, but my face showed a pitiful expression, acting like a wife who prepared a surprise for her husband and was scolded instead. I'm sure he won't dare to give me the key. After all, the drawer's contents are unseen. Otherwise, you can go get them yourself, so I don't have to run, I said, curling up on the massage chair, which is comfortable and even has a heating feature. I'm now in a state of passive resistance. If he says something, I'll cry. Anyway, it's not me who's anxious. Seeing that I was uncooperative, Tony turned and went out to call my dad. Crash. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of a door slamming from outside the study. I saw through the crack in the door that Tony, furious, slammed the bedroom door shut. No need to ask, he must have had a hard time at my dad's place. My dad was already upset about Tony's absence from the birthday party, and with my advance notice, it would have been surprising if Tony had managed to convince him otherwise. In any case, no matter what Tony said, my dad would adamantly insist that he liked the desk. The documents in the desk could be taken, but they had to be checked in person to avoid any future disputes over missing items. If Tony insisted on keeping the desk, my dad would immediately turn into a heartbroken father-in-law. A wounded father-in-law means no compensation, no house swapping, forget about it. Naturally, Tony wouldn't dare to sort the documents in front of my dad. He wouldn't even dare to handle the diary or the IOU with lipstick marks in front of him. He also wouldn't dare to offend my dad. If my dad really refused to help us with the house, Tony and Serena's plan would fall apart. What would he use to cover the debt then? In the afternoon, Tony went out again, citing overtime as the reason. As soon as he left, I went out as well. Tony was heading to Serena, and I was going to find someone to install surveillance cameras. I don't know what Tony and Serena discussed, but after that day, Tony suddenly became a devoted husband and filial son-in-law. He would frequently bring gifts and accompany me to visit my parents, showering my dad with compliments and insisting on appreciating Tony's father's research on Hamlet's characters. Don't ask, just know it's about filial piety and a love for Hamlet. Documents? What documents? It's best not to mention insignificant things. If he wants to play a role, we'll play along. My parents took turns chatting with him, from Hamlet to 100 Years of Solitude, from house swapping to having children, never leaving him alone next to the desk. Tony was so anxious that he developed blisters on his lips, but he had no choice but to go along. Seeing Tony's frustrated and restrained demeanor made me very satisfied. Tony used to be the type to enjoy the easy life, unwilling to visit my parents after marriage because they opposed our relationship. Counting the time, Tony's visits to my home during this period exceeded the total of the past 10 years. My parents were initially quite cooperative with my plan to toy with Tony, but as time went on and Tony didn't give up, my dad became unwilling. Hailey, enough is enough. Tony is getting frustrated. Have someone come and move the desk tomorrow afternoon. My dad scolded me as soon as Tony left. This is good, right? Tony didn't come to the last birthday party, and you were quite upset. This is just a punishment for him, I said nonchalantly while sitting on a stool. Sit up straight. My dad slammed the table. I quickly straightened up and placed my hands on my knees. My dad's anger was no joke. Before you married, I didn't think much of Tony. I was indeed angry when he missed the birthday party. But Hailey, since you chose to marry him, you need to respect him. Look at how you're playing Tony like a monkey and keep doing it. What kind of wife are you? My dad, holding his old-fashioned coffee cup, began to lecture me. Originally, I intended to keep Tony's infidelity from my parents, as it wasn't time yet to confront Tony, fearing they might slip up. However, Tony's recent submissive behavior was quite effective. His treatment had been upgraded from plain water to my dad's cherished black tea. When my mom heard that Tony would come again the next day, she started preparing steak in the kitchen. According to her, the beef needed to be marinated in lemon water overnight to taste good. With this level of care, if I don't confront him now, my position in my parents' eyes might soon be surpassed by Tony. Tony is cheating, I whispered to my dad. My dad spat out his tea. What did you say? Tony is cheating? Just as my dad finished speaking, the kitchen door opened. Who's cheating? My mom stood in the kitchen doorway holding a knife. My dad and I hurried to stop her, fearing she might break the kitchen door if we delayed. Under my parents' watchful eyes, I explained the whole process of discovering Tony's infidelity, like a school child confessing. Mom, is the beef still being marinated? I haven't had it for a long time, I blurted out nervously. As soon as I said it, I regretted it. Your husband is with a mistress, and you still want steak? You look like steak yourself, my mom said, poking my forehead angrily. Now that everything was out in the open, I decided to lay out the entire plan. The next day, when Tony arrived, he was met with even more enthusiastic parents. The steak was, of course, prepared, but the entire plate was placed in front of me, with the explanation that since we had no children after 10 years of marriage, it must be due to my health, and I needed to supplement it well. To have a child, both partners need to supplement, my dad said, pouring Tony a glass of whiskey and placing the bottle in front of him. Don't be shy, drink up and refill if needed. Tony, who is scared of snakes, wouldn't even eat eel or snakehead fish, let alone the bottle with a snake inside. I enjoyed the steak happily. After the meal, my dad made Tony play badminton with him. Tony, needing something from my dad, couldn't refuse to pick up the shuttlecock. As it happened, my dad was bad at the game, so it was Tony who had to work hard. When they came back, Tony was drenched in sweat, while my dad smiled and gave me an okay sign. Dad, why did you play for so long? Are you tired? As a dutiful daughter, I quickly handed my dad a towel and chose to ignore Tony. I'm not tired. Tony played very well, my dad said, nodding at Tony with admiration. By the way, Tony said their company gave out hot spring tickets. Next week, our family should go together. Hot spring tickets? Is it for our whole family? I looked at Tony with moved eyes. I have to work overtime. You and your parents can go. Tony hesitated. Tony, your mom and I are still planning to get you a small villa. Don't you have this little time? My dad's house threat was coming, albeit delayed. The old trick still worked. Tony quickly promised to take leave and accompany us to the hot springs, which was exactly what I wanted. Soon, the day for the hot springs arrived. Tony drove us to the hot springs in the suburbs. The process of soaking in the hot springs was very silent, with Tony and I both glued to our phones. The surveillance cameras I installed at my parents' house were connected online, allowing remote monitoring. Seeing Serena appear on the surveillance footage, I smiled. I knew Tony was too anxious to let anyone else handle the desk. Once we stalled him, Serena would definitely take action. After Serena opened the door, she quickly found Tony's desk. Unlocking the desk, Serena was stunned. Beneath the IOU covered in lipstick marks were drawers full of necklaces, rings, earrings, and bracelets. This was a trap I had specifically set for Serena, and I wasn't afraid she wouldn't fall for it. Ding dong, Tony's phone rang. He looked very happy, probably because Serena had informed him that everything was settled. Watching the footage of Serena sweeping the jewelry clean and even continuing to search, I couldn't have been happier. The prey was already in the net. On the way back, Tony's demeanor shifted from the previous day's attentiveness to one of arrogance. As soon as we got home, Tony's expression changed.
Oh no.
It's so messy. Did we get robbed? He then dramatically rushed to the desk. What should we do? There are important company documents in there, and now they're all gone. Tony howled, clutching the empty drawer. His acting was so over the top that it was almost a shame he wasn't in theater. His anxious look almost convinced me. How about we call the police? I said, looking at Tony with a sincere expression. Tony hesitated. Call the police? It's just a few documents. Isn't it below the filing threshold? He was quite the schemer, knowing the filing threshold. I immediately gave my mom a signal, and she promptly started her performance.
Oh no.
The gold bracelet Hailey bought me is missing. It's worth several thousand, my mom exclaimed, and right after, my dad discovered that his treasured martell was gone. Tony panicked. The value of the missing items was more than enough for a serious case, not just a filing. Don't panic, I comforted Tony. We have surveillance cameras. We'll definitely find your documents. Under Tony's terrified gaze, I dialed the police. Hello, I'd like to report a theft. This is number 3 Allen County Community. We've had a break-in. Knock, knock, knock. Soon, there was a rapid knocking at the door. Our community had been rated a harmonious community for 3 years straight. So it had been a long time since such a significant case had occurred. When I reported that the value of the lost items exceeded $30,000, I clearly saw the young officer's eyes light up. He eagerly asked if we had surveillance footage. Of course, we did. The high-definition camera was aimed directly at the desk, and in the footage, Serena's face was clearly visible. Oh my God, isn't that Serena? How could she? I gasped, holding my chest, showing shock, regret, and pain in turn. After all, we were married. If Tony could act well, so could I. Officer, can we withdraw the case? She's my friend, and I don't want her to go to jail, I asked. I would advise against that. Look here. The officer pointed seriously at the screen. In the corner of the paused image, a tattooed hand was visible. This might be a gang operation. It's fortunate that you and your family were not home at the time. Otherwise, burglary could have escalated into robbery. Robbery. I slumped into a chair. For such a significant case, taking statements was inevitable. Throughout the process, Tony appeared absent-minded, nodding at every question, until the police brought Serena in. Serena saw Tony and immediately burst into tears, looking pitiful and heartbroken. Tony's charm worked on me, but it didn't on the police. With the evidence being clear, Serena barely had a chance to say a word before being invited to give a statement. Officer, please take care of this case, I said. Rest assured, maintaining community safety is our duty. We will inform you of any progress immediately. After 2 hours of statements, our family finally left the police station. I was about to take my parents out for a meal when Tony caused another fuss. Hailey, I need to talk to you alone, Tony said. Seeing Tony's face, which was a mix of stubbornness and grievance, one might think I was about to force him into something unspeakable. I immediately lost my appetite, pulled out my phone, and booked the nearest hotel for my parents to have dinner and rest. Once my parents left, Tony and I found an empty flower bed and sat down. What's the matter? Spit it out, I said, as I was too fed up to give Tony any pleasant demeanor. Can you write a letter of forgiveness for Serena? She has her reasons, Tony said, not daring to look me in the eye. What reasons? Is it the reason of repaying debts or spending a romantic night with you? I retorted. You knew all along. You did it on purpose. Tony pointed at me, his eyes wide with panic, like a frightened toad. You caught me, I said, covering my mouth in a mock surprise. Plop. Tony knelt and hugged my legs. I know I've wronged you, but Serena is innocent. Please, save her. If you agree to help her, I promise I'll never see her again. It was already late at night, and the city lights cast an unreal glow on Tony's face. Hearing such classic melodramatic lines, I suddenly realized that in this story of relationships, if Serena was the suffering innocent heroine, then Tony was the devoted spare tire, and I, predictably, was the most detestable villain in the whole story. All right, I said, patting Tony's head and slowly smiling. As long as she returns everything she took without missing a single item. With my answer, Tony dashed off to the police station. He must have been eager to share this good news with Serena. Of course, I wasn't doing this out of kindness. I was doing it because of that hand in the video. From what I know about Tony, he would never let a third party be involved. So, Serena must have brought someone else without Tony knowing. If I'm not mistaken, that hand probably belonged to the debt collector. Can you guess if the jewelry is still in Serena's possession? What will Tony do when he finds out Serena can't return the jewelry? It should be quite interesting. Suddenly, I felt so malevolent, like I had a natural talent for being a villain. I love villains. They make me happy. Soon, Tony returned. In stark contrast to his earlier excitement, he now looked as dejected as a stray dog that had been inexplicably beaten. Hailey, return the items or go to jail. No more please, I interrupted him coldly. Tony hesitated. I can compensate you for Serena. Compensate? I sneered. Using marital assets? What do you want then? Seeing I wasn't backing down, Tony grew desperate. Let's get a divorce. You leave with nothing. I pulled out the divorce agreement I had prepared earlier and spoke clearly. At this point, Tony had no choice but to sign. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., bring the necessary documents. We'll meet at the Civil Affairs Bureau. I waved the agreement in my hand. I'm not a fool. Just signing a divorce agreement isn't enough. Both parties need to be present for the divorce to be valid. If you want a letter of forgiveness, bring the divorce certificate in exchange. The next day, with Tony's cooperation, we successfully obtained the divorce certificate. As soon as we came out of the Civil Affairs Bureau, Tony hurriedly took the letter of forgiveness and left. No need to guess, he must be going to inform Serena of the good news. Watching Tony's retreating figure, I couldn't help but shake my head. Without the lover's filter, I realized that the person I had loved for 10 years was actually this foolish. And I didn't even think about how I could possibly let them off so easily. 1 hour, 2 hours. I kept an eye on the clock. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The phone rang, and upon answering, Tony's curses came through. After living with Tony for so many years, I was shocked by his vocabulary for the first time. Although Tony was shouting at me, I wasn't angry at all. If I'm not mistaken, the police have just refused to release Serena. This isn't a personal attack, it's simply because Serena and Tony are too foolish. Burglary is a criminal offense. Even if I were willing to forgive Serena, she could only be exempted from civil liability, meaning she wouldn't have to pay damages. Release is impossible. Even without civil liability, there is still criminal liability. She will still have to serve time. I've already lost everything. Isn't that enough? Tony's voice on the phone was hoarse. Of course not, I said, and then hung up. 10 years, not 10 days, and not 10 months. I have wasted my best years on a man who never loved me, while my longtime friend treated me as a tool for compensation. How could it be enough for one to lose everything and the other to serve time? It's far from sufficient. Having timed it right, I set out to visit Serena. Through the iron bars, Serena's once beautiful face looked tired, her bangs sticking to her face in disarray. Are you satisfied now? Unlike Tony's anger, Serena seemed dejected. This isn't a good state. My follow-up plans still need her cooperation. Don't worry, I'm not here to see you make a fool of yourself. I said, I'm here to get you out. Why would you be so kind? Serena looked at me with a mocking tone. I leaned close to Serena's ear and whispered something. Her eyes first brightened and then showed a look of terror. Shh! I put a finger to my lips. 2 months later, Tony was sentenced to 3 years, and Serena to 2 years with a 3-year suspension. I sat below, watching it all. After the verdict, Serena's face showed a smile of relief, while Tony held his head high and shouted at me before being taken away. You don't understand love. How pitiful. I smiled at him. I couldn't wait to shatter his so-called love. Secrets are like fine wine. They need time to become rich and sweet. In the 7th month of Tony's imprisonment, I received what I wanted. Looking at the stack of photos in my hand, I gave the private detective a generous reward. Now, it's time to let the parties involved taste this fine vintage. With the help of a lawyer, I applied for a visit to Tony. Through the iron bars, Tony looked a bit thin but still had a good spirit. His eyes were glaring like some wild animal in an African documentary. If it weren't for the bars, I would be worried he might pounce on me. Congratulations, Serena had a son. I smiled and handed him a photo. Tony stared at the photo, mesmerized. Tony's self-surrender and harsh sentence were largely due to him taking all the blame on himself. But no matter how much Tony was willing to take the fall for Serena, with surveillance footage, Serena still had to serve time. The difference is only in the length of the sentence, with no fundamental change. I reminded Serena that for less severe crimes, a pregnant woman can receive a suspended sentence. Why did I wait so long to give them a chance to steal? It was to wait for this child. The private detective informed me the day Serena was pregnant, and I agreed with my parents to go to the hot springs with Tony. Serena wasn't the main offender, and with my letter of forgiveness plus her pregnant status, receiving a suspended sentence was only logical. Guess why I helped Serena? Is it because of kindness? I suppose my expression was frightening, as the lawyer even moved back a bit. What are you going to do to Serena and the child? If you have any issues, come at me, but don't hurt them. Tony must have gotten used to me leaving back doors. Even though he didn't know where the problem lay, he was habitually fearful. Why would I hurt them? I heard you wrote to your parents, asking them to take care of Serena. How touching. After so many years of marriage, I never got care from Tony's parents. I sighed in apparent regret. My mom is here to take care of the child. Who told you to be infertile after 10 years of marriage? I've done my part. Tony was quite self-righteous. Do you remember when we went to see a specialist? That was in the 3rd year of our marriage, because we had no children. My mom had a contact help us get a specialist appointment. I picked up the test results to protect Tony's pride, and kept the result hidden. Now, the test report was placed in front of Tony. Infertility, how could this be? And the child. Tony's face turned red, then white, and finally purple. You're lying to me, right? You're lying to me, right? Tony pleaded with me, hoping to get a denial from me. I looked at the almost madman with pity and hesitated for a moment before handing over the last photo. In the photo, Serena was shyly lying in a man's embrace. Although the man's face wasn't clear, Tony would recognize the tattooed hand around Serena's waist. After all, he had once spent half a page in his diary complaining about this muscle man. Tony went completely mad. As I walked out, I could still hear the shouting behind me, but it didn't last long and was quickly stopped by the guards. Tony must want to ask Serena for answers, just like I wanted to when I first discovered his infidelity. Unfortunately, Serena wouldn't come to see him. Imprisonment is not the end of punishment. I won't allow Tony to spend these 5 years clinging to hope and love, ***. He must endure this prison term in turmoil, pain, and regret. After dealing with Tony, I didn't plan to let Serena off the hook. I told Tony I wouldn't harm Serena, but I never said others wouldn't harm her. Not long after sending Tony's parents the letter to take care of Serena, I also sent out a letter. No need to detail its content. On the day I went to visit Tony, his mother, the one who would call me at the Bear and Hen during every festival, arrived. To be fair, my former mother-in-law's fighting ability was truly impressive. In the video sent by the private detective, Serena was stripped by my former mother-in-law and dragged downstairs, her white face covered in bruises. Of course, Serena wasn't exactly a delicate flower, though she had just given birth and was physically weak. Being young meant she had strong will and resilience, fighting back when beaten. The elderly and the young fought fiercely. Though most people were merely spectators, seeing the escalating violence led some kind souls to call the police. The police quickly took both away. If there are no surprises, my former mother-in-law will be detained for a few days, but it's nothing serious. Serena's case, however, was different. Public fighting during probation is extremely severe, and it's likely she'll be sent back to serve her sentence. As for the muscle man, there will soon be concerned citizens reporting him. If fate allows, he might even run into Tony in prison. What will happen between them then? Just thinking about it is thrilling. I heard the child was later adopted by a middle-aged couple who couldn't have their own. It's good. The child can have a fresh, clean start. The end. If you like Puppy's story, please follow and like it. Updated every morning at 9 a.m.